We ready to go forward?
Yes.
Here. Please bring the jury.
Let's rise for the jury, please.
Oh, Harrison tasting.
Candy bars from my wife. The judge is right.
It's to do a taste comparison between school and heat bars, see which is better. Well, it's a thank you for providing me a heat bar. I'm a fan.
Well, let me go here and cut. She said she wanted to cut. Please be seated.
Next witness, please.
Peyton Barwick.
Over to the plate.
All right, so first thing, introduce yourself to the jurors, and then the second thing is please spell your first and last name for the court reporter who's seated in front of you.
My name is Peyton Barwick. I'm a paramedic for Metro Atlanta Ambulance Service. Been a medic for about 5 years now on ambulance for the same amount of time.
And then for a court reporter, first and last name, if you'll spell that.
Peyton, last name is Barwick, Barwick.
Great. You've already given some testimony that you work as a paramedic, and I see that you're in uniform today, correct?
Yes, sir.
How long have you worked as a paramedic?
Since December 2012.
And describe what sort of training and education you have that qualifies you to work as a paramedic.
I have 1 year. It took 1 year to get EMT certified, and then I took another year. It's a diploma, but it's another year of extensive classroom and clinical training, and then you have to pass the state board test in order to be a paramedic.
And are you board certified? Did you pass that test?
I am.
Okay. I want to ask you about your role in this particular case from June of 2014. Were you employed as a paramedic on that day?
Yes.
Were you employed with the same company that you're currently with?
Yes.
And why don't you tell the jurors, who do you work for?
Metro Atlanta Ambulance Service.
And describe Metro Atlanta Ambulance Service in terms of area of coverage and what y'all do on a daily basis.
Okay. We cover about 3/4 of Cobb County. Cobb County is a really big county. Their contract says that we have to have 2 ambulances services in there to keep the rates fair. So with that being said, we cover about 3/4. There's about 705,000 people in Cobb County, which is, we're a very busy service. I run anywhere between 8 to 12 calls a day. Usually on my truck, there's an EMT and a paramedic. There's a difference between EMT and paramedic. EMTs are only 1 year, so they have a medical training just not as extensive. As being a paramedic, we were able to push more drugs, narcotics, more life-saving abilities, give you cardiac drugs when you're dead or to bring you back to life. Read cardiac rhythm strips to see where you are, and we can actually give medications to fix it. Just more advanced.
Okay. So as a paramedic, you're allowed to perform more advanced life-saving techniques than you would as just an EMT. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And can you describe, you use the term truck. When you refer to a truck and you're talking to this jury about that, what are you talking about specifically?
My ambulance.
Okay. And I know y'all, that's kind of the term within the industry is that you call it a truck. How many people typically work on a unit or a truck?
There's 2.
And describe for the jury exactly how that works out and what the different roles are for everybody.
Metro Atlanta has a policy where only a paramedic can ride in the back of the ambulance with the patient. The EMTs are the people that usually drives, and they're basically your second hand. You get a patient, you throw them in back of the ambulance, and they help you start IVs, just get the patient situated for the ride to the hospital. Other than that, the paramedic has to stay in the back with that patient at all times.
Okay, so you have the primary responsibility for the patient of the two of you on your truck or unit, correct?
Yes, sir.
And there's another individual who drives the truck. He's the EMT, correct?
Yes, sir.
I want to direct your attention to June the 18th of 2014. Who was driving your truck on that day?
Steve Thurlow, EMT.
Why don't you spell his first and last name just for our record?
I'm not quite sure how to spell the last name, but it's Steve, Steveen.
Thurlow. Does that sound correct? Okay. And I want to talk, still staying kind of in a general context before we get specifically to this case. Have you ever been called out to a crime scene before?
Yes.
Okay. And when you arrive on a crime scene, do you typically go on the crime scene by yourself, or how does that work out in terms of safety precautions and things like that?
It's according if PD is needed first. If it's a crime scene where PD is needed first, we stay back until the scene is secured by PD, and then we go in. Great.
And when you refer to PD, you're talking about police department, which could be any of the police departments within Cobb County, correct?
Yes, Sheriff's Department, Police Department, City of Marietta, wherever we may be in Cobb County.
This jury has already heard some testimony about the differing roles between the police department versus the medical examiner's office. Are you familiar with the medical examiner's office, and have you ever had to work with them on occasion?
I turn patients over to them.
Right.
Kind of work hand to hand to a sense.
Why don't you describe how your role is different than, say, as a law enforcement agency or a police department when it comes to responding to a crime scene?
Okay, I'm there for that patient only. Outside of that patient, if it's security-wise, it's a police matter. Say I pronounce someone deceased, then that's the medical examiners. They take over from there. I'm just there to make sure is the patient alive or are they deceased. If they're deceased, I leave them be. If they're alive or a chance of being resuscitated, that's when I take them and we take them to the hospital.
Okay, and who makes that call on whether you're able to transport somebody?
I do.
You do. And that's your responsibility at working for Metro Ambulance,
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Have you had occasions such as this one where you've made an assessment and determined that transport's not going to be necessary?
Yes, sir.
And when you're in a situation like that and it's apparent that this needs to be processed as a crime scene, do you communicate with law enforcement about that?
Yes, sir.
I want to direct your attention now to June the 18th of 2014 in this case in particular. Were you dispatched to a location to assess Cooper Harris?
Yes.
And describe for the jury about when you got that dispatch and what was the nature of the initial call for your response.
Per my report, we was dispatched to Mattio's, which is a restaurant in the parking lot, to an infant left in the car, not breathing, CPR in progress.
Okay. And once you received that information, did you proceed to the Mattio's that you just described?
Yes, with lights and sirens, as fast as we could.
Okay. And why is it that you were traveling as fast as you could?
Per protocol, we have to travel our lights and sirens. It gets us through intersections and around traffic at a safe manner.
Had you been to that general area before or passed through in any way, shape, or form?
Yes, sir.
And is this right there near Acres Mill?
Yes, sir.
Is that in Cobb County, Georgia?
Yes, sir.
An area that you're called upon to respond to through Metro Ambulance?
Yes, sir.
Can you please describe for the jury what happened after you received that dispatch for assistance?
We went en route to that location, and we pulled up on scene. There was police officers already on scene, but there was no medical personnel on scene.
Okay. Were you the first medical personnel to get to that scene?
That I'm aware of.
Can you please describe for the jury in terms of volume and in terms of how busy that area is? What part of the county? We have parts of the county that are more rural?
Yes, and that's one of the busiest parts of the county. It's right there at the 285 interstate and the 75 connection, so it's very busy down there.
And specifically the Mattio's you described, that's a restaurant, correct?
Yes.
Are there businesses in that particular location that you arrived to?
Yes, it's a very big complex.
And why don't you describe what happened once you arrived on scene? What did you observe and what did you do?
When we pulled up on scene, we parked beside the Mattio's. I saw Cooper Harris laying on the ground. Police officers were already on scene. There was no one doing CPR on Cooper. And the father was already in the back of the police car.
What did you do based on seeing Cooper on the ground at that point?
I went and first thing I checked was brachial pulse and a carotid pulse, and there was no brachial or carotid pulses, and the patient wasn't breathing.
You've used some medical terms, and because we've got different levels of medical understanding from
Okay.
our prospective jurors, why don't you describe the difference between those two pulses? We do have at least one nurse on the jury, several nurses actually, but some of these folks don't have any
All right,
medical
so
training.
brachial pulse is inside the arm. Carotid pulse is the pulse you feel inside your neck. We check two places. If a patient's in shock, they may not have the brachial pulse, but they'll have carotid. So we check two spots to make sure that there is no pulse in that patient.
I want you to go back to your description of the scene and ask you a few questions. Do you recall the temperature that day? You don't have to give me a specific number, but just generally speaking, back in June of 2014, was it a hot day?
It was warm.
Okay. And when you arrived on the scene, did you find anything unusual about Cooper's state and where he was located?
He was outside the vehicle already with no CPR being progressed, and no one was around the body.
All right. There was nobody around the body when you arrived.
No, sir.
And did you arrive fairly quickly?
Yes, sir.
And once you arrived and saw him on the ground, when you checked for pulse, did you find any?
No.
I assume when you went to Cooper's body, you had to actually touch him to check for the pulse. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you note anything about his condition when you went to assess him and see if he had a pulse?
His eyes were up and there was already glazed over. Rigor mortis and lividity had already set in, which is rigor mortis is the stiffness of the body. Lividity is the changing of the color in the skin.
Where the blood pools down because of gravity?
Not necessarily because of gravity. Your heart's not pumping and there's valves in your veins that keeps the blood going forward. Well, when that heart stops, it just sits, so it stagnates.
All right. And when you assessed Cooper Harris, did you note both rigor and lividity when you went to try to get pulse?
Yes, sir.
With the eyes being fixed as they were, what, if anything, did that indicate to you?
There was no neurological presence at the time.
Okay. Once you realized that Cooper was deceased, that there would be no chance of them giving any life-saving measures, what, if anything, did you do after that, Mr. Ferrell?
I asked my partner, Steve, to go get a sheet, and we covered the body because there was several people around looking at the scene.
We've seen some photographs. Some of them include a white sheet, and there's a little yellow thing beside it. Are those items that you brought to the scene to try to cover Cooper?
Yes.
And explain for the jury why it is that you did that.
It's a 2-year-old boy laying on the ground in the middle of a parking lot. No one needs to see that.
Okay. After you did that, did you have any communication with the police department about what your role would be and what kind of scene you have?
Yes, I walked up to the police officer and says the patient is deceased and now it's a crime scene.
You told them that it was a crime scene, that you were back
From
there?
my understanding, we have to assume it's a crime scene until proven otherwise. So we touch the body as less as possible. We don't disturb evidence if there's any there.
After you determined that there was nothing you can do, did you remain on the scene to give officers your information and also call for a supervisor?
With Cooper being a child, I had to get information for him for my report, so I had to speak with Mr. Harris about just getting general information, his name, the child's name, medical history, allergies, stuff like that.
Is that one of your job responsibilities as
Yes.
a paramedic?
Yes.
Now, you had given some testimony a little while ago about where the defendant was when you arrived on scene. Can you articulate in a little more detail where he was?
He was in the back of a police car, and they said they had him restrained just to keep everyone safe.
Gotcha. Now, were you focused on him when you first arrived on the scene, or was your focus primarily elsewhere?
It's elsewhere.
And describe for the jury where your focus was and why.
It's the patient. If there was any chance to bring the patient back to life, that was my number one priority.
All right. Before we get to your conversation with the defendant, I want to talk about some exhibits. And you and I had a chance to look at some of these today, correct?
Yes, sir.
First one is State's Exhibit number 4, by way of example. Is that a fair and accurate depiction of the scene as you saw it with some police officers with crime scene tape?
Yes.
State's Exhibit number 20, is that a fair and accurate depiction of the area where Cooper Harris was, and more specifically, Does that include the sheet and the medical items that you brought to cover him with?
Yes.
State's Exhibit number 51. Looking at 51, is that a fair and accurate depiction of Cooper Harris on the pavement as you found him when you were trying to get a pulse from him?
Yes.
And then State's Exhibit number 53, looking closer at 53, can you actually see some areas of discoloration that you had just given testimony about?
Yes.
And is that some of the lividity that you had told us about?
Yes, sir.
The first one that I had asked you about was State's Exhibit number 4. And you see State's Exhibit number 4 now exhibited up on this Mondo pad, this display.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is this the scene as you found it when you arrived?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And obviously we have some police officers and detectives here. Is this the vehicle that Cooper was beside when you arrived on the scene?
Yes, sir.
This is State's Exhibit 20, which I showed you previously. Looking at State's Exhibit 20, I want to ask you specifically, where, generally speaking, was Cooper situated outside of the motor vehicle?
Where the white sheet is.
Is he underneath this sheet here?
Yes, sir.
And is this the white sheet that you put on top of him because of the people that were outside observing the scene?
Yes.
And now we're going to display a picture of Cooper on the ground. I showed you State's Exhibit number 51, correct? And looking at 51, is that a fair and accurate depiction of the condition he was in when you found him?
Yes.
And describe his color and describe some of the things that you noted when you were making your assessment of him.
Okay, so rigorous martial arts today, when I went to move the arm, it was very stiff. It's not like me moving my arm, but it's very stiff, so that rigor mortis. If you look in the extremities, especially, you can see the discoloration in the lower extremities and upper extremities, which the lower legs and the upper are in the arms.
Looking at this photo, for example, can you see that discoloration here as I zoom in on
Yes.
that exhibit, State's
Yes.
Exhibit number 51? And then the last photo I want to show you, State's Exhibit number 53. Looking at 53 by way of example, what is this that we're seeing down here on Cooper's left arm?
Lividity.
All right. Once you made these observations and checked for a pulse, what did you do next?
I had my partner go get a sheet so we could cover the body. And as soon as we covered the body, that's when I told police officers that this was a crime scene. And I went back to the truck to get my computer, which is where I do my reports at. And I went over to Mr. Harris to ask him questions. Actually, information about Cooper and then information about himself.
Where specifically was Mr. Harris, you're referring to the defendant Justin Ross Harris, when you spoke with him?
In back of a police car.
We had previously seen a video, it's been a long time now, but we saw a patrol video where an Officer Piper took you to a vehicle so that you could speak to him, and we could hear some kind of mumble, some audio. Have you seen that before at our office with us?
Yes.
And is that an accurate recording, other than, so there's some inaudible parts, of you actually speaking with the defendant to get some of the vital statistics and information that you needed as part of your job responsibility?
Yes, sir.
Let's talk a little bit about what the defendant told you. Now, first of all, you can close this out. You're not a law enforcement officer, correct?
No, sir.
This was not, from your perspective, some sort of attempt to, get a statement like we see on TV in an interview room or anything like that.
No, sir.
What was your purpose in speaking with him versus what law enforcement's purpose might be in speaking to the suspect?
My general purpose is just to get medical information, the patient's name, birthday, and then since the patient was a minor, we have to get the parents' information also.
First question I have for you is, were you able to assess the demeanor of the defendant in the back of the patrol vehicle as you were speaking with him?
Yes, sir. I can see him.
And can you please describe for the jury what his demeanor was like when you were speaking with him?
Very dry, showed no emotion, was not crying.
You didn't see any tears or crying or anything?
No, sir.
Was he able to speak with you calmly when you asked him questions and
Yes,
answer
sir.
your questions?
Yes, sir.
And did you ask him, for example, his address and his phone number?
I did.
Did he provide that information to you?
Yes, sir.
And did you document that in your report? You said that you did it electronically, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
You got a copy of your report in front of
I
you?
do.
All right. So what's the phone number that he provided to you?
Let me look in my report. 205-792-6806.
All right, 6806, the last four digits.
Yes, sir.
And it's a 205 number, correct?
Yes, sir.
And what about an address? Did he give his home address?
He did, or he gave me an address.
What's the address he provided?
1212 Lineswood Ridge Circle, Marietta, Georgia 30066.
I've heard it pronounced two different ways, Wins Ridge or Wines Ridge. Why don't you spell it for us?
It's WYNNES,
And what city is that located in?
Marietta, Georgia.
Right. In speaking with him, did he also give you the date of birth for Cooper?
He did.
And what was the date of birth that the defendant provided for Cooper?
08/02/2012, so August 2nd, 2012.
Did you ask him for a timeline of the events that led to your response to the scene?
I did.
Please tell the jury what the defendant told you from the backseat of that patrol vehicle.
Per my report, he said he ate breakfast with Cooper at around 8:45 that morning, and then he went to work. He showed up at work around 9 a.m. He rolled up his windows, locked the car, walked inside to work.
Do you remember him saying where he had breakfast with his son or fed his son?
Not quite sure.
Okay. And about what time did he say he gave Cooper his breakfast?
8:45.
Did you
In the
document
morning.
that in your report?
I did.
After getting this timeline of events from the defendant, did you have any other interaction with him?
No, sir.
Do you have any responsibility in processing the crime scene?
No, sir.
Did you at any time attempt or make access to the vehicle that was located there?
No, sir.
Why would you have not accessed the vehicle?
The patient wasn't in the vehicle.
All right, sir. I think that's all I have for you right now.
Morning.
How are you?
Wonderful.
Mr. Warwick, you're familiar with this area of Cobb County. You mentioned that it was the busiest part of Cobb County?
I
One of
wouldn't
the
say
busiest?
that. I wouldn't say it's the busiest.
Okay, what was your testimony? That it was one of the busiest?
One of the busiest.
Okay. You met with the state to prepare your testimony today, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And we heard Mr. Evans in his questions refer you to the crime scene, continue to refer to the crime scene. When you're called out, you have no idea if you're responding to a crime scene.
No, I did not.
Correct? And in fact, you wrote this report, your patient care report, soon after June the 18th, 2014?
Same day.
Same day. Okay. While things are fresh on your mind?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is it typical to have multiple call-outs on a given day?
Yes, sir, but with that typical call and report, I finished my report before I got another call.
Okay. Do you always do that?
No, sir.
Why did you do it on this day?
With it being the situation it was,
Right.
there was a good chance that I knew that I may be called to court for it. So I wanted to make sure my report was as accurate as possible.
Okay. You wanted to do it while it was really fresh on your mind.
Yes, sir.
Include all the details
That I could, yes, sir.
that you could remember
Yes, sir.
that were important, correct? Now, would it be fair to say that information that you don't include in your report is intentional, right?
I wouldn't.
You decide what to put in your report and what not to put in your report.
I would say intentional. If I didn't put it in my report, then I may not have thought of it. And once I submit my report, I can't make any changes to it.
You can't make changes to it?
I can't, no, sir.
Okay. But there is a way to make an addendum to the report.
There is.
Okay. And you're familiar with that process of making an addendum to the report?
Yes.
Okay. How do you do that?
I contact a person at my place of business that their job is strictly to read every report that goes through the company.
Okay.
If they see a mistake, they'll call me and say, hey, did you make this mistake? I did. They can change it. I can't go back and access that report. They
Okay.
can, though.
And isn't it true that that happened in this case
Yes, with vital signs.
with vital signs?
Yes.
Right? And that was an honest mistake,
Yes.
right? Someone else reviewed your report and called to your attention something that was an obvious mistake,
Yes.
an accident on your part.
Yes.
And that was regarding vital signs.
Yes.
Okay. You had indicated that the child was alert.
I did.
Okay. And Cooper was obviously not alert.
By medical terms, alert just means your eyes are open. His eyes were open, but I didn't know how to write that, so I just put that and we made that addendum.
Was that something that you hadn't gone over or hadn't experienced before in your training or in the field?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In fact, when you arrived on the scene of a child that was non-responsive, you testified that the dad, Mr. Ross Harris, he was already in custody.
He was in the back of the police car, yes, sir.
And it was before you even had Mr. Thurlow place a blanket
Yes.
over the child
Yes.
that PD advised you that this was a crime scene.
I said it was a crime scene from my point of view.
Okay. Well, would it refresh your recollection if you had an opportunity to take a look at your patient care report?
Yes, sir.
To see if you were advised that this was a crime scene?
I have my report.
Okay. In fact, you were sitting outside and you had it with you
Yes.
before you testified.
Yes.
Okay. Well, take a look at your report, please. The second to last line of that first full big paragraph.
Okay.
Isn't it true that PD advised that this was now a crime scene?
Yes.
Okay? And that was before you placed the blanket over the child. Take a look at your report.
Yes.
Okay.
It was.
So before you had really acquired any information from Mr. Harris, spoken to him, PD had already determined this was a crime scene.
Yes, sir.
So when you arrived on scene, you have no way of knowing if Mr. Harris was performing CPR?
I didn't see it with my own two eyes.
You didn't see with your own two eyes his demeanor at the scene,
He was in the back of a police car.
right? You were interviewed on scene by the police, correct?
I was asked questions, yes, sir.
And in fact, you were interviewed by a detective days later.
Yes.
Do you remember those two interviews?
I remember a phone call from an investigator.
You testified that your focus is on the patient.
Yes, sir.
Your focus is not on the dad.
No, sir.
Mr. Harris. Okay. And you would agree that in your report, you never indicated that the father was emotionless, dry, no crying.
My report is to the patient, not the family member. If he had if he had a medical problem where I had to do a report on him, I could have done that then. But that if it don't pertain to his health or Cooper Harris' health, then it wouldn't be in that report.
Okay. Well, I mean, you would agree that being advised that this is a crime scene has nothing to do with the child's health.
No, sir.
But that is something that you include in your report.
Yes.
Okay. You'd agree that Mr. Harris being in the back of a patrol unit has nothing to do with the child's health.
Well, I had to put it on there because they said CPR was in progress, and I stated in my report where the father was.
Okay. But the physical fact of him being in a police unit has nothing to do with the child's health.
No, sir.
Okay. But that's still something that you would include in your report.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you would agree with me, though, that even though there are things that have nothing to do with the child's health, you still include them in your report.
Yes, sir.
Okay? And your opinion and assumption about Ross's demeanor is not something that you included in your report.
No, sir.
In fact, when you were interviewed by police at the scene, you did not provide them with your opinion and assumption about Mr. Harris's demeanor.
No, sir.
And when you were interviewed by a detective days later, you didn't provide the detective with your assumption and opinion of Ross's demeanor.
Not that I can recall.
Judge, may I have a moment?
Please.
Thank you. Mr. Barber, do you mind stepping down, please?
I do not.
Thank you. I'm showing you Defendant's Exhibit 2. It's already in evidence. Do you recognize this aerial scene of the Acres Mill Shopping Center?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And this is specifically the area that you said is one of the busiest parts of Cobb County.
It's one of the busiest. It's
You've got 285
yes, sir.
close by,
And 75 close by.
75 close by. 75 is one of the biggest interstates in the southeast, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And it runs right through this neighborhood, this area.
Not right through it, no, sir. It's I would say it's on the west end,
Okay.
northwest.
Just north of it, it runs maybe a half mile.
Maybe a half mile.
Okay. And 285 is maybe one exit northwest of this photograph.
If this is Cobb Parkway, it's just north.
Okay. Traffic is very, very heavy.
It is. I wouldn't say very heavy, but it is heavy.
Okay. After 4 o'clock on a weekday,
It's rush hour.
rush hour. Thank you. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Couple of areas. Do you remember while you were speaking to the defendant, did he ask you anything about Cooper Harris?
Yes. He said, "Is he dead?"
Okay. So the defendant specifically asked you whether Cooper was dead while you were speaking to him at the back of the patrol.
Yes.
Did you give him any response at that time?
I said, "Yes, sir. He's deceased."
I want to ask you a follow-up to the demeanor question. Having reviewed the video, you saw the video from Piper's patrol car the last time we met. I think it was up in Cobb County, correct?
Yes.
And did that accurately record the defendant's demeanor when you spoke with him?
Yes.
And then finally, these reports can sometimes be a little bit complicated, but you have a copy of yours in front of you, correct?
Yes.
Are there areas that are automatically populated and that you have to fill in terms of vital signs and things like that?
I have to fill them in. Yes, sir.
All right. There was a question that was posed to you about doing an addendum, and I note on your addendum it's very, very short. You made a couple of corrections to some of the additional things. Is that
Yes.
correct? and specifically you wanted to talk about vital signs and that the the victim in this case, Trooper Harris, he didn't have any, is that correct?
He didn't have any.
I wanted to ask you about the notations that are here. You got 1649 and 1810.
Yes, sir.
And I know, flipping back to the beginning of your report, those correspond with some times that are here.
All right, there's an objection, Mr. Evans.
Oh, I didn't hear that.
I know, I didn't think you did. Mr. Rodriguez is objected to leading.
Okay, I'll rephrase the question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Looking on the second page of your report, right here, I've got a copy too. What's that time stamp where you start your notations?
Judge, I'm going to object. There's no foundation for refreshing the witness's recollection. I don't know if he's trying to impeach his own witness or what Mr. Evans is trying to do.
I don't think there has to be a foundation for it, but I'll rephrase the question. And no, I'm not trying to impeach my witness. What time did you start taking vitals?
These were 1649.
Okay, is that 4:49 in the afternoon?
Yes.
And does that correspond with your addendum as well?
Yes.
Okay. And there's a second time that's notated there where you made an addendum, correct?
Yes.
What's that time? What time did you make that?
The second set at 1810 was entered in error and does not belong to this patient.
Okay, so the 1810, that's a 610, is that correct?
Yes.
So you made two minor corrections, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's what the defense was pointing out to you?
Yes, sir.
That's all I have.
Do you have further?
When you reviewed Officer Piper's dash cam video in the district attorney's office, were you shown the portion of the video where Mr. Harris was frantic and stressed out
No, sir.
screaming? You weren't?
No.
The only part that you were shown is when he was in the car?
Yes.
Okay. You were asked about what Mr. Harris had asked you. You didn't include that in your report either, did you?
No, sir.
You don't know if Mr. Harris was asking you with all hope that his child was still alive?
No, sir.
You have further?
No.
You're free to go. Thank you. Next witness.
They would call Captain Ferrell.
You solemnly swear affirm the testimony you shall give to the court and hear about it, nothing but the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I do.
Be seated, please.
Good morning, almost afternoon. Would you please introduce yourself to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury by telling them your name and then spelling it so the court reporter gets it right?
My name is James Ferrell. It's James. Last name is Ferrell, Ferrell. And I'm a captain with Cobb County Police Department.
And currently, are you assigned specifically to a precinct or something like that, or where are you assigned as a captain?
Yeah, I work for the police department, but I am currently assigned to the Director of Public Safety's office.
And just describe that. What is the Department of Public Safety, and kind of what is your role between CCPD and DPS?
Yeah, in Cobb County, we have a Director of Public Safety, which is over the police department, the fire department, 911, and animal control. And so in my position up there, I work as his executive officer, so I'm his bridge or his link between the public safety director and the chief of police in their department.
Captain Ferrell, how long have you been in law enforcement?
Since 1992.
Okay. And where did you start out working in law enforcement in 1992?
92, I worked for DeKalb County Sheriff's Department. I spent about 4 years out there, and then in 96, I transferred to Cobb County Police Department. I've been here ever since.
With the Cobb County Police Department, I guess, what role did you start off with Cobb County? What was your job, your duties, things like that?
I started off working patrol like most every other officer does, and I spent some times with that. probably about my first 5 years. Then I transferred into our Special Operations Unit. I worked with our TAC team in Special Operations for several years. Was promoted out of there to Sergeant, where I've been back and I've worked as a Precinct Sergeant. Transferred to our training unit, spent some years in our training unit working over there before I was promoted out to Lieutenant. Went back in patrol for a while, and then I transferred over into our Crimes Against Persons unit, working there, and then I was promoted to captain out of that. I mean, I'm currently in DPS at that job.
Let's go specifically to your job working as a lieutenant with Crimes Against Persons. How long were you in that job?
Just over a year, about a year and a half or so.
Now tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, what is, as far, I guess it differs between jurisdiction and police department. With Cobb County Police Department, what is the Crimes Against Persons unit and what types of crimes do they investigate?
Crimes Against Persons unit is going to investigate, of course, any of the major crimes against people, rapes, murders, armed robberies, things like that. We'll also still investigate some of the more misdemeanor crimes from simple assaults and simple batteries. But it's going to be a crime obviously that involves a person. So if there's a significant injury or an injury to a person, no matter what the level is, we typically would pick up those cases and work them. So terroristic threats, cases like that. We didn't work most any of the property crimes. We stayed away from property crimes, and they were handled by another unit.
As a lieutenant over Crimes Against Persons, what was your job responsibility? What were your duties?
It's mainly organization and resource management. You come in and you're having to organize your resources, which are your detectives, crime scene investigators, and things like that. Making sure that we have people available to answer calls, making sure that their caseloads are not running too heavy on the detectives there, making sure we have enough people to properly investigate the cases that we have. Working as a liaison between my shift, I was a watch commander over there for evening shift. I work as the liaison between that and our unit commander, who was a major on day watch, to update him on cases that were going on and things that were happening. May update the deputy chiefs or the chiefs on cases that are going on that they have interest in and they'd like to be briefed on.
As a lieutenant, when there is a report of a crime or something like that, do you take a role in assigning detectives, depending on what type of crime it is?
Yeah, I do in some cases, and we do have a sergeant that was below me in there. And the sergeant, one of their primary duties would be to assign those cases. And so that sergeant might be working out on a call. And sometimes our sergeants would be tied up. So if they were tied up, then that duty would respond to me or fall back on top of me, and then I might assign a detective to a case or go out and work it as their supervisor.
I'm going to turn your attention to June 18, 2014. Were you working as a lieutenant with the Cobb County Police Crimes Against Persons unit on that day?
Yes, sir, I was.
Okay. And that afternoon, did you receive any information about an incident or something going on as far as a possible crime at the Acres Mill Shopping Center in Cobb County, Georgia?
Yes, sir. I got a phone call from our unit secretary, and typically that's how we received case information when they needed us to respond. They would call to the unit secretary and tell her, hey, we need a Crimes Against Persons detective to come out. She called me and notified me of this particular call.
When you were notified of this call, what, if anything, did you do?
What did I do?
Yes.
I ran into two detectives in the parking lot. I was walking through our parking lot at the time. I ran into two detectives. They had already been notified that there was a call down there. From the brief description that I had gotten of this call, I felt like two detectives was probably not going to be enough detectives to send down. I got in touch with two other detectives, and I had them respond down to the scene also, and also had some of our Crimes Against Children units make sure that they were on the way to come over.
Now, who are the two detectives, if you remember, that you ran into in the parking lot?
Stockinger and Racy.
Okay. And in addition to them going to the crime scene, who were the other detectives that you assigned, and why did you assign that one person as a lead detective?
Detective Stoddard and Murphy came down, and the reason that I actually picked Detective Stoddard was he had a little bit different experience than other people. Each case that you work is different. In this case, it involved a smaller child. And Detective Stoddard had experience working in our Crimes Against Children unit, which focuses solely on investigation of crimes against children. And he also had experience working in our homicide unit and working with that. So I thought his knowledge and his combination of experience would be really good to put on this case, and he could do a thorough job with it.
Okay. I'm going to turn your attention then to, do you remember well, first of all, did you go to the actual scene?
Yes, sir, I did. I had a sergeant working that night, but our sergeant was actually working another scene, and was out as a supervisor on that, so I ended up picking up this one and responding down.
Okay. Do you remember what time you responded?
It was a little after 5 o'clock, around 5:15-ish, 5:20-ish, somewhere right in there.
Okay. Now, let me ask you a couple of questions. Did you do a report in this case?
I did.
Okay. Well, First of all, with this, telling the jury, when did you actually do your report in this case?
It was quite a while after. It was quite a few months, maybe even almost a year after, probably, where I actually wrote my supplemental in the case.
Okay, and why was it that you waited until then, or you didn't get around to it till then, or explain to the jury why you did it at that point?
Well, a couple of reasons, and first I would just have to say it was an oversight on my part. I should have written the supplemental prior to that. It was a very busy time, and I had a lot of things going in that unit, especially with this case and the other cases that we had going. I typically do not put myself in a position as a supervisor to where I'm going to be investigating a case or have knowledge that I'm going to pick up to where I would need to write a supplemental in it. So it wasn't something that was normal for me to have to do. And with this particular case, I guess I got distracted and busy and taken in a lot of different directions. And then about 3 months into the case, I was promoted. And I was moved into the Department of Public Safety with an entirely different job that I was trying to pick up. And quite honestly, it was an oversight on my part at that point. It should have been done. And first time that I even put together that I hadn't written that supplemental was when I was speaking with another detective. And that detective was talking about putting the case file together a year later because they were putting the case file together for delivery to the DA's office. And I'm like, I owe you a supplemental for that. I have not written that supplemental, so I got it written then and got it put in the case file.
And were there some things that ordinarily you wouldn't have noticed or been involved in that you did actually, upon the scene, need to know?
Yes, sir. And the way it worked out, there were some things that I probably noticed on the scene that there was no other detective there to notice. And on most of the crime scenes we would respond to, if I noticed something and other detectives are working that are actually investigating the case, I may point these things out to them. But in this particular case, everybody was tied up and they were busy, and I ended up being the last person standing, I guess. And so that was why I was going to actually have to write the supplemental off the case in the first place.
Would it refresh your memory to look at your report now regarding approximately what time you actually arrived at the scene? If I showed you your report, would that accurately refresh your recollection about what time?
Sure, yeah, I got it.
Okay. All right. Just looking at your reports, second paragraph, does that refresh your memory about approximately what time you showed up?
Yeah, it's about 5:20.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, Captain, when you responded to the scene, first of all, is this the memory of this day pretty clear in your mind?
Yeah, yes, sir. This one's definitely pretty clear.
Okay, when you got to the scene, did you speak with anybody or get briefed initially about what the history or what had occurred per the information you had or officers had at the time?
I did. There was a uniformed sergeant on the scene. I believe it was Sergeant Thorpe. He gave me an overview of what they had at this point in the case.
And at this point, did you notice where who you later found to be the defendant, where he was?
It was my understanding at the beginning of the case that he had already been secured in the back of a patrol car. I saw him in the back of a patrol car from a distance. I never actually went to the patrol car to see him up close.
All right. Initially, when you're talking about your approach to and dealing with the scene, what did you do as far as arriving there and what you noticed initially?
Well, my job when I arrived as a supervisor, number one, is to make sure that our crime scene has been secured out there. So if there is a crime scene, I'm going to look at the bigger picture of what's going on. Where are all of our people at? Have we roped it off? This had a big media response. There was already a crowd of people that had gathered down through there, so I had to make sure that we were addressing those outside factors also with the people, that we had contacted our public information officers and had them on the way. And in this particular case, I'd asked about where Mr. Harris was, the father, and that's when I was told he was in the car, in the back of a patrol car, and that was pointed out to me. But really what I'm looking at is the big picture of the crime scene when I show up and the bigger picture around it. And do we have the right people coming to come down here and to deal with a case like this?
And as far as crime scenes, could you tell the jury about how many scenes, if you could even estimate the amount of scenes you've been on involving dead bodies and things like that, or homicide scenes?
Over the years, dead body crime scenes would be dozens of dead bodies, a lot of natural deaths and things that occur. When
you arrived or you're at the scene, did you notice, did you have it pointed out to you, a possible motor vehicle that had been involved in the incident?
Yes, sir, there was. It was a little Tucson that was sitting in the parking lot, and the crime scene tape had already been pulled off of that.
Okay. Was there anything else around or in the area of that Tucson?
The door was open, the driver's side door was open, there was a sheet on the ground, and then it was covering what I was told was the body of a small child.
I'm going to show you just what's already been admitted as State's Exhibit 20. Just ask you to look at State's Exhibit 20. You recognize that? Does that fairly and accurately depict the child in the car as you saw it when you arrived on the scene?
Yes, sir, that's pretty accurate.
Okay. And Your Honor, I'm just going to publish this since the jury's seen this numerous times, so they see what he's talking about. Upon seeing the vehicle, what, if anything, did you do at the scene when you noticed the vehicle?
Well, I've been given a brief of what the officers at the time believed had occurred. And so they gave me the general overview of the case. And as our medical examiner got there, I was working with our crime scene tech to make sure that he was processing the scene correctly and that he was taking the different photos that he needed to take and the different video evidence down there as he was working. The medical examiner arrived on the scene. I had moved down towards the area of the car and had gone up, I guess, to right by the driver's side door. And I was kind of taking a visual through the door and looking and seeing if the things that were on the scene actually kind of matched up with what I had been told had happened out there. And so I was standing and I was looking.
You said the door was open at this point,
Yes, sir,
correct?
the door was open.
Okay.
And the driver's side door was open. So I was standing right at the edge of the driver's door at the B-pillar of the door looking inside. And I was just going through my head what everybody told me had happened, and I was trying to figure out how all these pieces fit together. And because as a police officer, that's kind of what you do, is you figure out how do the pieces fit together with the story that you're being told. And in this particular case, of course, I was doing a visual look inside the car, and I also noticed an odor inside the car. And of course, I was right by the driver's side door. And so I stuck my head into the edge of the door, and I smelled the interior of the car and noticed that there was an odor inside the vehicle.
And at this time, was the car running?
It was, and I believe the air conditioner was on. I can't tell if it was air conditioner or just blowing air. There was air blowing inside the car. I would assume that it would be an air conditioning.
Okay. And could you describe the smell, or what you smell when you put your head inside the car?
It was a combination of odors, and it was really, you could smell the odor of a diaper from a child, and also from having a couple of kids. You could smell the sweat of the child in there. So it smelled like a sweat in the diaper, and then also really had that really unusual odor that I can only associate is with something that's dead and with death.
Okay. Now, as far as that smell, is that something that, have you ever studied the mechanism of death as far as what causes that or anything like that, or is this from your experience showing up on scenes where you've got people who have passed away?
It's just from my experience of showing up on scenes and being around dead bodies and over in different states. And there's an odor that is associated with that that's very unique and of its own.
Okay. And as you went to the car as well, and you put your head in there and you smelled this, did you notice anything inside the car relevant to where the child would have been?
I did. I noticed where the child's seat was at, and it was in the middle of the back seat, and it was turned rear-facing, and it was in between the driver's seat and the passenger seat. So it looked almost like it was kind of like wedged up on the edge between the driver's and the passenger seat. And it was plainly visible from the driver's door when I was looking in. I could see the seat.
I'm going to show you what's already been admitted as State's Exhibit 35. Showing you State's Exhibit 35. Do you recognize this, and does that fairly and accurately depict the car seat as you saw it on that day when you looked inside the car, when you had your head in the frame?
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay. I'm publishing, just for the record to the jury, State's Exhibit 35, which they've already seen, just to know what he's talking about. Okay, Captain Ferrell, was this, describe don't give me an exact temperature, I don't guess you put down a reading, but was it a hot day, cold day, or something else?
It was a hot day. It was warm outside.
Okay. You talked about the car being rear facing and seeing it in the middle there. After noting that, did you also assist the medical examiner's investigator as far as examining the child's body?
I did, and the medical examiner showed up, and of course, he's doing his process on the scene to start his investigation going through there. Typically, one of our detectives will be with the medical examiner when they do that. The medical examiner may point out certain things that they observe from that point, and so I picked up that process that day.
When do you remember the name of the investigator who was there with you?
Is that Jackson?
What did y'all do there with that child? What did you do to assist him?
I didn't do a whole lot to assist him, and that's really more his job function as he's going through doing that part of the investigation. So I'll do my part, he can do his part.
And is your part, is it based on, basically, are you also looking at and analyzing based on the facts that you've been told about what may have happened in the case?
Yes, that's correct. And, it's my understanding that the child had been left in the car and all day long in the car, and that's where the child actually died. So as he was going through there, he would point out different things to me that he may notice as a medical examiner on there as he's doing his basic inspection of the body. So I was basically listening to his report of what he was seeing with the child.
And when he would report these things, did you actually get down close to the child and observe these things as the lieutenant there?
I did. I actually got down with him right at the edge of the child, so we squatted down and we were next to Cooper.
Did you notice anything on the child's body that of significance?
His hair was sweaty. It was matted down. His eyes were partially open. Mouth was partially open. He appeared to be real stiff in the joints. His knees were bent up, and he was stiff in the joints. There was a small scratch on his face. It looked like maybe from a fingernail or something. It was a real small scratch on the face.
Okay. Now, when I know this is outside the elements and everything with this as opposed to the car, but when you got down close to the child's face, did you notice anything, or to the child's body, did you notice any smells or anything like that?
I did actually notice the smell, again, when I got down close to the child. When I was standing, I could not smell anything coming off of him. But when I got down close to Cooper, then I could actually smell. The only thing I could describe is the smell of a dead body.
Did you also smell the same thing with the diaper related?
Yes, it's the same. It was the same combination of smells that I picked up inside the car from the sweat, the diaper, and the dead body.
Now I'm going to show you what's already been admitted as State's Exhibit 51. And I'm not going to, the jury's seen this, so I'm not going to publish it in this time, but just to show you State's Exhibit 51, do you recognize that?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, does that fairly and accurately depict how Cooper looked the day you were there on the ground with him?
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay, Lieutenant, after you assisted the medical examiner and things like that, did you do anything further of significance with the investigation of this case? Or was kind of, I guess, your job other than supervising, was it done?
Well, the supervision part was, I went back to the office, I briefed Detective Stoddard on the things that I'd observed at the scene. Of course, he briefed me, and that was his job throughout most of this case, was to do that because I was his supervisor. And but no, the investigation portion of this case was turned wholly over to Detective Stoddard and the other detectives to work.
I believe that's all I have, Judge.
Cross-examine.
Morning.
It's Captain Ferrell now. It was Lieutenant Ferrell at the time, correct?
Yes, sir.
You'll give me if I get those mixed up.
That's fine.
I appreciate it. All right. When you got to the scene, do you recall how many Cobb County police officers were there on the scene?
I couldn't give you an exact number. There were quite a few uniform officers and detective officers that were on the scene.
Okay. And I understood you say that Detectives Racy and Stockinger were already on scene, but there were no other detectives at that initial point in time?
No, sir. There were actually some detectives from our criminal investigation unit down in Zone 3. They were property detectives that had shown up on the scene,
Okay.
along with the uniform officers.
Very good. And the way Cobb County is set up, you have different categories. So in a crimes against person case, something involving a death, that wouldn't be handled by a property detective.
No, sir. They would handle all property crimes.
Very good. And so the only crimes against persons detectives were, that you recall at least, were Racy and Stockinger when you arrived.
Yeah, and they might have beat me there, and I'm not sure if Stoddard had beat me there or not. I can't remember the exact sequence because we all kind of showed up at the same time. The GPS coordinates for the address they gave us sent you to an erroneous apartment complex, which was not the right location.
Yes.
And that was how I originally had gotten the call, was with an address instead of saying Acres Mill Square. So we all showed up pretty close to the same times down there.
All right, very good. And you recall if it took you a while to get there, just in the afternoon traffic?
It wasn't anything super fast. Like I said, the GPS sent us back down to a place that was about a half a mile away from the actual scene where we wanted to be at.
Very good. And, but you ultimately, you made the decision for Detective Stoddard and Detective Murphy to be called to the scene, is that right?
I made that phone call when I was leaving from there, so that was before I ever actually arrived on the scene. They were en route to the scene with me.
Very good. And is that when you made the decision as far as the signing of the case out to these detectives? Or
I did not. When we first arrived on the scene, I was briefed on what was actually happening with the case, and at the time I knew that a small child had died in the back of a car, and that was the only information I had responding. Once I got there and I got further information from the uniform officers that were on the scene and some of the other detectives, and I started looking at the scene itself, then that's when I made a decision on what detective I thought would be best to actually handle that case.
And I think I understood you say that you chose Detective Stoddard because, at least in part, because of his past experience with the Crimes Against Children unit, correct?
In part, yes, sir.
All right. And that's a unit, just so we're clear for the ladies and gentlemen not familiar with Cobb County, they investigate crimes specifically with children as victims, correct?
Yes, sir.
And most notably, they deal with sexual offense crimes for the most part, correct?
And child abuse crimes,
And
too.
physical abuse, absolutely.
Yeah.
Very good. And do you know how long Detective Stoddard had been out of that unit at this point in time?
Couldn't tell you the exact time he had been out. I would say for at least a year or so that he had been transferred to Parsons.
And had you had a case to assign him to some other homicide cases already?
Yes, he had been working other homicide cases.
Now, as you got to the scene, you've indicated several people are talking to you, kind of telling you about what they believe has occurred and what's been reported to them, that sort of thing. Are you just kind of standing outside the perimeter, if you will?
That's correct. Yes, sir. And you meet with them outside the crime scene tape, and they come up and they start briefing you on the things that they know or that they've been told up to that point. And so they're basically just passing that information on.
Do you remember who, other than Officer Thorpe, do you remember who else you may have spoken with?
I spoke with Lieutenant Sabula. He wasn't there at the time. I spoke to him on the scene about having one of the children's detectives actually work with us on this case. I spoke with Sergeant Quinn Harris on the scene, Sergeant Thorpe from our uniform patrol. I want to say that those are the main people that I spoke with when I first got there.
Or did you say Quinn Harris?
Yeah, Quinn Harris.
And as far as uniformed officers, did you speak with any of the uniformed officers?
I did not.
Particularly any of the first responders, Officer Piper, Folia, or Gallimore?
No, I don't recall having any conversation with them.
Do you remember seeing any of them there by chance?
I do remember seeing them there. All their cars were still on the scene. They were off doing their own work and their own thing, and then I was working it from our side. So,
And I think you indicated that you saw a police car in the distance that Mr. Harris was sitting in.
yes.
Do you remember where it was at the time that you got there?
It was off on the other side of the building. Would be his car was outside the building on that, and then I believe it was off to the other side going back up towards Eckers Mill Road.
And let's, for the records, I can see you moving with your hands a little bit.
Yeah, it's hard to describe. It
Clear.
was closser to Eckers Mill Road, and his vehicle was closer to the building, the strip mall inside Eckers Mill Square.
All right. And as far as the distance between his car and the patrol car he was in, can you guesstimate what that might be?
That'd be a wild guesstimation. I would say maybe 40, 50 feet from what I recall. I don't remember exactly.
So certainly it's not parked right behind where his car is. It's off in front of Mr. Harris's car.
It's away from Mr. Harris' car.
And I think you indicated you never went to that patrol car to speak to Mr. Harris yourself, correct?
I did not.
All right. And did you make note about Mr. Harris as far as him making sounds or anything from the patrol car?
I wouldn't be able to hear him from my vantage point where I was at, or really it was hard to even see him. I could see a figure, a silhouette of a figure in the car, but I couldn't really even describe who it was.
Just too far away from where
Yeah,
you
and the
were?
way the light was shining that day, and when they're in the back seat of the patrol car, I wasn't actually trying to identify him inside the car because it wasn't something that I was concerned with at the time.
Fair enough. And had you been advised as to why he was in custody?
I had been told why he was in the back of the patrol car, yes, sir.
All right. And with regards to, as you came inside the scene, how long were you just kind of hanging out there before you decided to enter into the scene itself?
I don't know, our crime scene tech showed up shortly after I got there. So when Shumpert showed up, I spoke with him for a minute. He went down and started working in. I entered the crime scene not too long after that because I had to go down and talk with him about some certain things I wanted to do to make sure he did when he was processing the scene. And there was also a helicopter that was flying up above, and I knew that we wanted to get a canopy or a tent to put down to cover up from the view from the helicopter.
Is that a press helicopter?
I'm pretty certain it was.
What you assumed it was anyway?
Yes, sir.
What police involved?
No, it was not a police helicopter.
And is that Bradley Shumpert that you're talking about as a crime scene tech that you had out there?
Yes, sir.
Very good. And do you recall what it was that you told him that you wanted him to do?
The main thing I told him is that I wanted him to work this case, and I think the terminology I used with him was, hey, this is a serious case, and I want you to document this case just like you were documenting a homicide case, and not anything else. Do everything that you would do on any other homicide scene. I want everything videoed, everything photographed from every different angle, and collect every piece of evidence to the best of your ability. And so I wanted to make sure that he was very thorough in his investigation of it.
Okay. So it's fair to say that as you got there and had information about what was going on, that still in your mind, you knew this might be a criminal case or this might just be an accident case.
No, it was, if you lock a child inside a car and the child dies, then it's a criminal case. And so there was no doubt in my mind it was a criminal case. It was just what circumstances surrounded that to what level of a criminal case it was going to take it to. But it was a criminal case for certain in my mind when we got there. How we went to process the scene was after that.
So before you've interviewed anybody involved, you've made the determination it's a criminal case.
If you lock your child inside your car and your child dies from that, absolutely it's a criminal case.
And so when you talked to Detective Shumpert, or excuse me, crime scene Shumpert, you told him to document as if it were a homicide, correct?
Yes, I did. I wanted him to make sure that he was very thorough in his crime scene documentation.
And did you task him with anything else specifically to document?
He was sent to other scenes after that. Once he wrapped that scene up, he did go and document and photograph some other scenes in the area because he was our crime scene tech that was working. So we had executed a search warrant later that night. There was another vehicle that I had to go out to take pictures of, things like that.
Well, just staying on the scene itself where the car is, do you remember telling him specific things that you wanted him to document?
I don't recall exactly what I told him specifically, other than the photographs that I wanted to take and to make sure that he actually did the video documentation of it. But I don't recall anything specific that I pointed out to him.
How about regarding the car seat? Do you remember tasking him specifically to take photographs of the car seat from different angles?
I don't recall that exactly. It sounds reasonable that I would say that, but I don't recall that exactly.
All right. And as he's doing that documentation, are you still outside the scene or are you kind of walking around with him?
Actually, I was inside the scene at that point. I'd gone down and met with him, and so I was inside the crime scene at that point.
Okay. Are you walking around with him as he's doing stuff so you can kind of make sure you get certain things documented?
No, I wasn't. No, I was not tagged right alongside him. So I just gave him some general directions of things that I wanted to make sure that he did.
All right. Very good. And you were there as the investigator Jackson from the ME's office. He showed up, correct?
Yes, sir, he did.
And you were there before he got there?
Yes, sir.
Correct. And when he got to the scene, did you start tagging along with him, or did you just kind of let him go do his thing while you're still kind of standing outside?
No, the only thing he's really going to come to the scene to investigate is going to be the body of the child that was at the scene. So that's his area of expertise, and that body would belong to him. as far as his job's concerned. So he's not going to be just wandering all through the crime scene and going through different things. He's going to come focused specifically for the body of the child that was there.
And so as he gets there and starts doing that, are you some distance away from him, just kind of letting him do his thing?
Nope, I actually went down with him, and so as he removed the sheet from the child and they photographed the different things, I actually was standing there with him when we did that.
Well, and that's what I want to talk about real specifically. When you first came to where Cooper's body lay, were you with him as investigator at that point in time?
Was I with the ME investigator when the first time that I walked over there?
That's correct.
No, I'd been down in the crime scene prior to that.
Okay. And who were you with when you went down there?
Myself, I believe Shumpert may have been down there, but I can't think of anybody else who was inside the crime scene at that point.
When you said Shumpert may have been there, I take it he wasn't standing beside you at any point in time?
No, he was going down there working, so he was doing his job.
And so you just kind of went on your own to go up to the vehicle and to where the child was, is that correct?
Yes, sir. I made a determination that I was going to go in the crime scene.
And when you went up there, I think you indicated that as you came up to the driver's side door, you noticed that the vehicle was running and the air conditioner was on, correct?
Yes.
Right. And as far as noting the air conditioner running, how were you able to make that determination?
You could hear it blowing inside the car.
You could hear it without even getting inside the car, correct?
Hey, when I was up next to it, I could hear the air conditioner blowing inside. I was standing right outside the driver's side door.
Very good. And then you've indicated that you were in close proximity to the open door.
Yes.
And can you tell us exactly what that distance was?
I would say within a foot.
Okay. And there would be a reason why you would not enter the car at this point in time, is that correct?
No, I didn't want to enter the car at this point because I wanted for us to document the evidence inside the vehicle and the condition inside the vehicle and where everything was sitting exactly as it was when Mr. Harris had exited the vehicle in the parking lot. So nothing was touched inside there until we could actually document that part of it.
But you would not enter the car before a search warrant was secured for that, correct?
No, we're going to get a search warrant to go through and actually collect evidence outside the car or from inside the car.
From inside the car,
Yes.
very good. And so you indicated to us that you went inside the car before that was obtained?
I did not go inside the car before that. I did lean my head into the door jamb inside the car and stuck my head inside there. And that was because I did smell something that was coming from the vehicle. And once I smelled that odor coming from the vehicle, I did make a closer inspection of that. I did stick my head inside the door frame of the vehicle into the car.
So the smell that you smelled was something before you even got your nose into the car, correct?
Yes, sir. I could smell it from the door frame.
And obviously Cooper's laying right there under the sheet beside the car, correct?
Yes.
And you recall in your mind kind of, it's about 36 inches, sound about right from how far he was from the car itself?
Pretty close to that, yes, sir. That's
I
not
think we
right.
saw a picture of it, y'all were just looking at it a while
Yes,
ago. All right.
that would be accurate.
And so you may not have to necessarily step over the body, but you had to kind of work your way around to even to get to where you were standing by the door, correct? Without
Except at the
touching
door
it.
frame. Yes, sir.
Very good. And so before you got to that point, you smell the smell, and this is you described it as a diaper, correct?
There's several things. It was a combination of smells. It smelled like sweat. It smelled like a diaper because diapers smell like diapers. And then it smelled like the odor of death.
And when you say a diaper, you're talking about just like if you went to the grocery store and
Just a
kind
diaper.
of baby smell, some of us may refer to it, I guess. But
Yes, sir.
all right. So you're not talking about a dirty diaper or anything of that nature. You're just talking about the smell of a diaper.
No, the overwhelming smell was just of the diaper itself, and I could smell the diaper very strong.
And again, just so we're clear, this is while Cooper's body is under a sheet, correct?
Yes.
And then you talk about this this third odor that you call a unique odor of death. I think you referred to it as. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And this is something you said that you've smelled this how many scenes before where there's been a dead body, correct?
Many times, yes, sir.
And these scenes that you refer to that you're going out to, these could be ranging from all sorts of shootings, stabbings, killings. all sorts,
Naturals,
correct?
anything.
Natural death, absolutely.
Yes, sir.
And they could be indoors, outdoors, all sorts of locations.
Yes, sir.
And, but as you got to the scene, clearly, Cooper was already out of the car, under the sheet, people had moved away, before you got there, correct?
Yes, sir.
And never had an opportunity to, be there while Cooper's body was still in the car seat, correct?
No, sir.
All right. And, as the ME's investigator was there, were you present with him, as he was moving the body around and showing different things on Cooper's body?
Yes, I was.
All right. And do you recall him actually pulling up Cooper's shirt and pulling down the diaper just to kind of see some different areas?
Yes, sir.
And you were present when that happened?
I was.
All right. Do you recall CSD Shumpert being there when that happened?
Yes, sir. He was photographing.
All right. Where were you at that point in time?
The medical examiner would be on one side of Cooper, and I was directly on the other side of him.
Okay. Any reason why CSD Shumpert would not have been able to see you at that point in time?
No, I wouldn't think so. So I stood up and moved as he came in and took the pictures because he was so small. Cooper was small, so I know when he was coming in to take the pictures, I would move out of the way so he could take the pictures.
So it's your recollection that you were standing right there with CSD Shumpert and Investigator Jackson as they were taking these photographs?
Investigator Jackson was on one side of Cooper. I was on the other. I knelt down in front of him as he started showing it, and he pulled the child's shirt up, undid the child's diaper, showed me the interior of the diaper, and we had a conversation about different things he was noting on the body. He would talk to CSD Shumpert and tell him the things that he wanted him to make photographs of. At that point, I stepped up and I moved out of the way, and Shumpert came and made some photographs into it.
The smell that you referred to in your report, you specifically, indicated that when you leaned down, you could smell the odor of decay in his diaper, correct?
Yeah, I could smell the odor of whatever gases come off your body when you have a dead body. I could smell the odor of the dead body. I could still smell the diaper.
Okay. You believed you were smelling odor of gases coming off the body?
I don't know what it is that comes off. I'm not real technical into that side of it. I just know that this odor does permeate off the body.
That's been your experience from the many scenes that you've been to?
It has been my experience, yes, sir.
All right. And as you're leaning down close to Cooper and you're smelling this, is Investigator Jackson kind of explaining to you different things that he's seeing?
He was explaining some lividity that had formed, the rigor mortis that was set in, and different stages of the body stiffening up to me. He was just pointing out simple things like that.
Okay. And he's moving the body around to show you these different things and moving his clothes around, correct?
Yes, sir.
And again, prior to your getting on the scene, you're not aware of who all had moved the body, where the body had been, other than obviously where ultimately he lie, the movement of the body and jostling of the body around before you got there, correct?
No, I didn't witness any of that, sir.
Now this indication about the smell, did you note that to anybody there on the scene?
No, not on the scene. I actually noted that to Detective Stoddard that night when I came back. I briefed him when I got back to the office, and I told him that about the odor that I had smelled inside the vehicle and on the child on the ground. And outside of that, no. There was no one there to make a notification to.
I'm sorry.
No one there that I would have made a notification to on what my observations were, what my thoughts were on that.
And if Detective Stoddard asked you to please write a report about that?
I told him that I would write a report about it, yes.
You told him that you would?
Yeah, I did.
then, in your meeting with Detective Stoddard, was there anybody else present when you met and gave him this disclosure?
There were several detectives that would be there. Detective Racy, Detective Murphy, Sergeant Knowles. There could have been any number of people that could have been standing around. It was a conversation that we had outside my office when he first came out of the interview with Mr. Harris, and was telling me some things that he had learned from his interview, and I was speaking with him about things that I'd observed down at the crime scene itself.
And despite having told him that, you failed to do a report for some time.
I did. I failed to type that report up in a timely manner.
In your job as a lieutenant at the time, were you involved with having to go and investigate individual scenes yourself, or was your job basically the delegation of resources?
Now, very rarely would I go out and actually investigate one myself unless we just don't have anybody, and then I may go out and do that. My main primary function is the supervision of the officers in our unit, going over the different cases that we have going on with them, organization of all of our resources over there, and making sure that we're going in the right directions. And then, of course, personnel issues, just dealing with our personnel in the unit.
All right. And, but basically, as you've indicated, you just got busy and distracted and failed to do a report.
I did. I actually, there's no excuse. I just failed to write that report in a timely manner.
And because you have other things that got you busy and distracted.
I do have other duties that I've assigned, yes, sir.
And you just forgot. Is that fair to say?
Asked and answered, sir. I did forget. I told you I failed to write it.
And a year later, was it Detective Stoddard that came to you and said, hey, how about write that report now? Or
No, actually, he was putting together his case file, and I ran into him, and I was by the office, and I ran into him. He was putting together his case file for the DA's office. We were talking, and I asked him where it was at, and I'm like, it just dawned on me, hey, I need to write a supplemental for you about the things from that night, and that's when I went back and wrote it.
So he didn't ask you about that or mention anything to you about not having a report?
Now, he may have brought it up in the conversation we were bringing it up, but he didn't track me down or anything. We were having a conversation about other things.
And did you go write the report right then and there?
Well, I wrote it in a timely manner after that. It wasn't right then and there.
Okay. More than a week? Less than a week?
It would have been within the next few days.
All right. And who would you submit your report to be reviewed, since you're the lieutenant?
I would just submit it back to one of the shift supervisors and have that supervisor look over the report.
You would not have provided this to Detective Stoddard before you filed it?
No, the report would have gone into the system and be approved by, I believe it was Sergeant Knobloch, I think, that ended up approving my report. But it would have gone into the system and been approved by him. Now, whether Stoddard had access to an unapproved version of the report or not, I don't know.
Give me just one moment, please. That's all I have for right now. Thank you very much.
Briefly, Your Honor, this is one of those times we always say briefly. I really mean it. So, when you talked about crimes that the Crimes Against Children Unit investigates, you talked about, I know Mr. Lumpkin said sexual abuse. Does that always also include cases of physical abuse and cases of child neglect?
Yes, sir, it does.
Okay, that's all I have.
Anything further?
I don't think so, Judge. Thank you very much.
You're good to go.
Thank you.
Council, vote.
You know, guys, need IT at all? You gonna say?
I mean, we need, oh, yes.
1:45. Close your notepads, keep it up in mind, don't talk about it. Open mind, closed mouth.
Watch your stuff going down.
We're in recess. You all have a good lunch.
Okay,